Welcome back to The Blast Zone, the podcast where we dig up the bombs that shook Hollywood and try to find out why they went up in flames. This week, roll for box office success. Oh, critical failure. This is Dungeons & Dragons: Honor Among Thieves. Welcome back to The Blast Zone.
Welcome to The Blast Zone.
We are not a podcast about bad movies. We are a podcast about movies that did badly.
That's right.
I am Jon Drake, in-house film critic of my Letterboxd account.
And I'm Ian Dukes. I'm a person with thoughts and feelings, and some of them are about movies.
Movies like Dungeons & Dragons: Honor Among Thieves, which we'll be talking about today. But before I get into that, Ian, how have you been for the last 3+ months?
Well, it's been a long time. It's good to be back. I've been through a lot since we last had the chance to podcast. I'm not even ready to talk about all of that, but I am excited to jump back into the Blast Zone and to be bombing out pods with you, my buddy. It's good to see you.
I know. I've missed this. And I will say that I have not been through a lot. Pretty much my life has been in a state of stasis. But I am channeling my inner Michael Jordan today, trying my damnedest to play through the flu.
Oh, it's a flu game. Wow.
I'm having my flu game. So if this podcast comes out good, I should be held in that same regard as Michael Jordan.
I think John's going to drop 60 tonight.
Let's go. I don't even know what to say. This is so exciting.
It's good to be back. I hope that someone out there is flipping through their little podcast app and goes, oh, Blast Zone, I remember those guys. And they're also glad that we're back.
Yeah, you know, it has been a void in my life. And I think we're going to hit the ground running. We're doing something a little different for our January episodes. We're only doing movies that came out in 2023. So we'll be reviewing some of the biggest bombs from this past year.
Yeah, it turns out there's a lot of them. And it lets us be current and topical and fresh and hopefully reignite some interest in the show. Like, oh, I remember that movie because it only came out 6 months ago.
Yeah, once we've reestablished ourselves, we can get back to the movies that people are like, the fuck is that? Is that a movie?
Some arcane shit
Yeah.
no one's ever heard of.
Miracle Mile? What the fuck is Miracle Mile? I really like the Miracle Mile episode, though.
Yeah, it was fun. We have fun. No matter if it's big or small, old or new, we have a good time here.
So we've got a lot of backlog that we could choose for our show and tells. So what did you want to tell the people that you watched in our time away?
Along those lines of trying to stay fresh and current, I watched a little movie that's still out there. It is now Oscar season as we're taping this, and one of the big contenders is a movie called Maestro. Now, there's a tie-in between Maestro and this week's movie, but I don't want to do spoilers right here at the very top. Now, I watched Maestro. I was blown away. And then afterwards, I started to read and listen to what other people thought. I get that not everybody was as blown away as I was. There's plenty of angles you could attack this movie from, notably Bradley Cooper and his air of up his own ass theatrical indulgence, which
his big fucking fake nose.
Yeah, there's a lot of pomp and silliness. There's the way, the movie is a Hollywood biopic of Leonard Bernstein. It chooses to skip over the guy's main accomplishments, and it doesn't really even show on screen some of his most significant contributions. And it focuses instead on his personality, his family. It's a character study. But the fact is, despite all that, this movie did its job. It made me feel feelings in a huge way. And not just for the melodramatic characters and their relationships, which is what it's mainly about, but the filmmaking choices. It's got all these great, bold choices, the staging, the blocking, the choice of camera angles. I know that sounds geeky, but like they're really on display in this movie. And so I love Bradley Cooper both as an actor and a director in this. And by the end, I was bawling in tears. I was clapping in joy.
At the same time?
Yeah.
That must have looked insane.
I look insane a lot of the time when I'm watching movies. And this one was right up there. But I think if you see it with an open mind, hopefully it'll make people feel things too, like it did for me.
Yeah, we talk a lot on the podcast about acting with a capital A. And I feel like Bradley Cooper is directing with a capital D. And I regret that phrasing already. Like, I haven't seen Maestro yet, but I've obviously seen the trailers and I watched A Star is Born and I enjoyed that movie too. But yeah, his head's firmly up there in his ass. But that's okay. That's what we want from directors once in a while.
It's real. He loves it. He's the biggest acting nerd ever. That's just who he is. And he lets it all hang out.
Let him cook is what I say. Talk your shit, King. And he's winning me over with kind of his weird little choices that he's been making and his cameos, which we'll get into. Because he seems like he's having fun with his celebrity status, which doesn't feel like it happens often enough. They don't use the clout they have to like fuck around enough.
Yeah, he's having a good career. He's really making his path through Hollywood.
Yeah, good for him. We like Bradley Cooper here. He was not in the movie that I'm bringing for show and tell, but it is another one that's pretty current. And I don't think you can see it in theaters anymore. I think it's officially left at least North American theaters. It wasn't a super long release, but I went opening night to an IMAX theater and saw Godzilla -1. And let me tell you,
that's your boy.
That's my boy. If you listen to the King of Monsters episode, I love Godzilla, even if I didn't love that movie. I loved Shin Godzilla so much. I think this is even better than Shin Godzilla. It's a truly like terrifying rendition of Godzilla. He is not this kind of benevolent protector guardian that he is in the American movies lately. He is a manifestation of nuclear fallout from World War II and the guilt associated with the atrocities committed during that war. Yeah. It's a very human story. It's got a great cast of characters that like, that's a big complaint we hear about the American kaiju movies is that the human characters drag the story down as opposed to elevating it. And that is not the case at all here. You will fall in love with this cast. Plus the Godzilla special effects. This movie had a tiny budget. I don't know how they did it. There are some sequences in this movie that are just incredible to look at. And it's relatively grounded. It all makes sense, at least by its own rules, which I appreciate very much. There's not a lot of like pulling things out of your ass. Everything's pretty much set up. There's callbacks and everything. It's just so well done, so interesting, so exciting, and so moving, actually, by the end of it. I was almost in tears as well.
Yeah, there's a scene near the end. I don't want to spoil anything, but there's a scene where Godzilla conducts the Mahler Third Symphony in a cathedral in Great Britain, and it's just really, you can't help but cry.
Yeah, and really drives home how fast he is because he's right back in Japan in the next scene. Felt like an interesting choice. But so let's talk a little bit about Dungeons and Dragons, Honor Among Thieves. Ian, I know you watched this before we even planned on covering it. We didn't even know if it might be coverable. I think it was still in theaters when it hit streaming, one of those dealios. I did the same. I watched it over the Christmas break with my wife and my friend Tim, and we just got drunk and had a blast watching it. And then when I found out we were going to rewatch it 3 weeks later, I was not the least bit bothered.
It's a good time movie. If anyone wants to go back and hear my initial thoughts on it, that was back in our Gone in 60 Seconds episode last year. I came to streaming pretty fast. I guess I heard some good things and I was interested in it based on, I don't know, seeing the cast on the poster. Had good feelings about Chris Pine for a while. So I'm like, oh, this should be fun. And it delivered. I'm just a casual Dungeons and Dragons fan, but it kind of doesn't matter. This is a good time Hollywood action picture. And it works if you're a serious D&D fan, and it works if you don't know a thing.
Yeah, I've never played a second of Dungeons and Dragons in my life. And that's not to say that I wouldn't have enjoyed it. I'm not like fucking nerds. It's just I never had a group of people that played Dungeons and Dragons around me.
No, yeah.
We were Magic the Gathering people. It's not like I don't have nerdy hobbies. But like even when the first trailer came out, I was like, huh, that looks pretty good. And then I saw, obviously, we love us some Chris Pine. I love the directorial team behind this one because, you know, they did Game Night, which I'm a big fan of.
Yeah. You clued me into Game Night. And then I think, did I bring that for a show and tell one time?
I believe you did,
you told me, because I thought it was so good. What a boon for Dungeons and Dragons fans and for fantasy action comedy fans in general that a team that good got involved in writing and directing this thing.
Yeah, unfortunately, it did not live up to expectations at the box office, but that may not have derailed its future as much as that typically does, which I can get into if you'd like me to.
Yeah, let's hear how this thing happened.
All right. Dungeons & Dragons fans had good reason to be skeptical about a new D&D movie after the disastrous early 2000s film trilogy. That's right, trilogy. They made 3 of those pieces of shit.
More like Dungeons and Doo-Doo.
Only the first one got a theatrical release, and even with big names like Jeremy Irons and Marlon Wayans, and a modest $45 million budget, it was a failure both critically and commercially. After Dungeons & Dragons 3, The Book of Vile Darkness was released direct to Sci-Fi in November 2012, rumors of a reboot of the series started pretty quickly. Warner Brothers and Sweet Pea Entertainment announced a film was in development on May 7th, 2013, and on May 9th of that same year, Hasbro sued them, as they had their own movie in development with Universal Pictures. It would take 2 years in court to sort it all out, and eventually the movie was set to go at Warner Brothers and Hasbro. After years of slow progress, Hasbro moved the film to Paramount and started negotiations with Chris McKay to direct and Michael Giglio to write. McKay would get a story credit, but that was the end of his involvement with the movie, as directing and writing duo Jonathan Goldstein and John Francis Daley would sign on to direct the film after walking away from the Flash movie.
But walking away like really fast.
Goldstein and Daley had done something even more difficult than making a successful D&D movie. They'd made an R-rated, non-IP, non-sequel comedy a hit with Game Night.
How can that be profitable for Warner Brothers?
They got to work on their own draft of Giglio's script, and casting began with Chris Pine being announced in December 2020. Michelle Rodriguez, Justice Smith, and Regé-Jean Page followed in February 2021, with Hugh Grant and Sophia Lillis joining soon after. With a substantial $150 million budget, filming for the movie, now titled Dungeons & Dragons: Honor Among Thieves, began in Iceland in April of 2021. Principal photography would start a month later in Belfast, with the cast taking part in a marathon D&D game to get to know each other and their characters better.
All right, roll to see who gets the big trailer.
Production wrapped in August 2021, with the lengthy post-production process then getting underway. The release date moved around quite a bit, but it finally settled on March 31st, 2023 for its US release. The movie had good buzz coming off its premiere at South by Southwest, and it debuted within expectations, making $37.2 million its opening weekend. It did suffer from a 61% drop in its second weekend, though, as the Super Mario Brothers movie made a whopping $146 million and had a sizable audience overlap. There had also been some acrimony between D&D fans and the current owners of the brand, Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro, which may have led to some fans boycotting the release. Critics loved it, though, with it sitting at an astounding 91% on Rotten Tomatoes. The film left theaters having made just over $200 million worldwide, firmly marking it as a box office bomb, but the reception to the movie was so overwhelmingly positive that Paramount Pictures has not ruled out a sequel. In addition, a spin-off TV series was given a straight-to-series order to stream on Paramount+. Whatever the status of those projects, it's safe to say that Dungeons & Dragons: Honor Among Thieves will go down as a stone-cold cult classic.
Well, I hope so. It's a classic in my heart already. And
How can it not? How can it not? It's basically Monty Python for our generation, I think.
It's good. It's a lot of things. One of the things that's cool about this movie is, to me, it's a hopeful vision of like the least debased version of modern Hollywood, where everyone laments that you need IP to get a movie made. You can't get funding unless you're connected to some big IP. Last year, we also had Barbie, which was the even bigger outlier that twisted like a even more mainstream toy into something, took it further, had added meaning that this movie doesn't really strive for. These guys took the straight and narrow path, and they just wanted to make a funny action fantasy comedy.
You can't forget about Oppenheimer, too. You had an Oppenheimer doll as a kid, right?
That's true, yeah. He would pull the string on his back, and his eyes would just bug out and start to tear up.
And he would say things like, "How I become death, destroyer of worlds." And you'd be like, "Oh, Oppenheimer, you're so crazy."
People are like, yeah, IP's ruining Hollywood. And Goldstein and Daley were like, it doesn't have to. You can do a fun job with it. And they did. And everyone was like, yay. And then the box office just crumbled, which was like, everyone seems to attribute to the competition, right? The timing, like they just picked the wrong weekend and they got clobbered by Super Mario.
Yeah, which makes sense. I could see a decent overlap there. There was another movie that came out around that time too.
Yeah, there was something else that people bring up. But I feel last year was such a resurgence for just overall theatrical ticket sales. I'm like, movie this good shouldn't it have found an audience? But I guess the death knell for it was they went big. They spent a lot of money on this movie. This is not like the lean and mean version. This is the all-out version. That's a theme that I'll probably come back to because they go all out on everything in this movie. They illustrate
you see
everything.
The budget. Yeah, like there is no shortcuts taken with this movie at all.
It's set piece after set piece, and they're all set up with big CGI settings and effects and fight scenes, starting from the very top of the movie. Like they wrap this simple backstory about a man and his wife and his baby set in this huge, unbelievable fantasy prison tower that is so grandiose for this sort of small setup, but it establishes the theme of the movie that they're going big with everything.
Yeah. I mean, and it's part of what makes the movie so magical. And I guess the head of Paramount did say they'd be willing to discuss a sequel, but it would have to come at the lower price point, obviously. And I think Daley and Goldstein are on board with that as well. You brought up a good point, though, about it seemed like the box office was back in a big way, but then we look around and I feel like the box office has gotten less predictable. There was a period of time where everything was flopping except superhero movies.
Yeah.
And now superhero movies are flopping, and Wonka is like a worldwide smash hit.
Oh, it is? Oh, my God.
Which I've got to eat some crow because way back on our mailbag episode, someone asked what was one movie currently in production that I was guaranteed was going to be a bomb.
Oh, no.
And I said the Timothy Chalamet Wonka prequel.
Did you promise to eat a purple velvet top hat?
You mean more than usual? Like I have one a week, but I can do two. Yeah, so that's on me. But also, fun note about John Francis Daley, he got his start as an actor.
Yeah.
And you might remember him from Freaks and Geeks.
I do. I mean, that's the only face I picture when
He looks the same.
Okay.
He's not aged at all. And he was also in Waiting. He played the new waiter in that Ryan Reynolds, Justin Long movie.
Oh, did not see that.
He was kind of the framing device of the movie. But enough about other movies. We're here to talk about Dungeons & Dragons. Should we get into the storyline a little bit so we can start picking apart some of these set pieces that we're so enthusiastic about?
Yeah, here we go. Ed Darvis, played by Chris Pine, is a bard with a heart of gold and also a love of gold. Sadly, those qualities are what got his beloved wife killed by disciples of the evil Red Wizard. And now, it's why Edgin has joined a party of thieves. He's doing it to steal the Tablet of Reawakening, a magical item with the power to bring his wife back to life. But the heist goes wrong, and Edgin and his best friend, a surly warrior named Holga, played by Michelle Rodriguez, are captured. And while the other party members escape, including the so-so sorcerer Simon, played by Justice Smith, a rogue conman named Forge, played by Hugh Grant, and a suspiciously creepy wizard named Sophia, played by Daisy Head. 2 years later, Edgin and Holga stage a dramatic prison breakout and return home. But things have changed. With Sophia's help, Forge has taken over for an ailing lord, and now he runs the city of Neverwinter. Even worse, Forge has been raising Edgin's daughter, Kira, and through his lies, he's turned the young girl against her father. Instead of welcoming his old friends to his new castle, Forge captures Edgin and Holga and orders them killed. But our heroes escape, and Edgin hatches a new plan to steal back both the Tablet of Reawakening and his daughter.
Very plot-heavy opening third of this movie, but it never stops being hilarious and fun.
Yeah.
And I guess we got to start with the prison sequence along those lines.
Chris Pine puts the movie on his back from the start. He's so funny in this opening sequence where he's making his case before the Absolution Council to
Jonathan.
Yeah, Jonathan is one of the jokes in the movie that everyone loves, that carries through. There's a fabulous actress, I don't know her name, who plays a halfling member of the Absolution Council. And as things get nutty, she has maybe my favorite line in the movie.
It's so good.
She's throwing potatoes. Oh, Jonathan. As they go out the window grabbing this Birdman. Sorry, spoilers. This is like a pretty new movie. We don't usually do movies that are new. If you haven't seen it, go watch it now, because we just spoiled the climax of the opening scene, and we're not going to stop there.
I don't give a fuck. I'm going to spoil everything. Yeah.
No, we don't.
I'm not scared. But like, you knew they weren't going to spend the whole movie in prison, right? That would not have been fun.
No. It's crazy, though, how much effort they do to set up this prison. Like, when you don't know what the movie is, and it starts with a big armored sled being dragged across a frozen wasteland and a giant tower, you're like, oh man, this is a movie about a stark frozen prison. And it's not. It's just the setting to get the backstory out.
I wonder if this is when they were in Iceland, because that was mostly filmed in Northern Ireland, but they filmed a little bit in Iceland, as I mentioned in the monologues. That would make sense, because yeah, it does have that very desolate, isolated feeling.
Yeah, that's another thing that contributes to the budget. There's tons of CGI. There's a lot of realms and places that are fully fantasy constructions in a computer somewhere, but they also did a lot of location shooting, so the movie does feel grounded. It doesn't feel cheap at all, like a green screen movie.
Right. And I don't know a ton about special effects, but I think it's probably cheaper to render CGI creatures against a CGI background because of things like lighting and those situations than it is to render CGI creatures against a real background, which they do in a lot of scenes here.
And the CGI is not the most realistic, but it's not supposed to be. It's a fantasy comedy world, and it's got fantasy comedy CGI, which just worked just right for me.
Yeah, and it was a great capper to the escape from the Absolution Council to find out that they actually had already approved their pardon when they launched their escape plan. So all of that was unnecessary.
The joke writing in this movie and the performances to carry it off are both just top notch. Even if you're like, oh, I don't like fantasy, the jokes and Chris Pine is so good. I was thinking as I watched this, like, there should be a genre that's just Chris Pine comedies where he's a wisecracking, hapless hero who gets by on his wits. I'm like, why is that not a genre? He's like a Cary Grant for our age.
Yeah, I was trying to think of the movies where I've seen him be funny, and there's not a lot. I remember Smoking Aces. He was like funny in a deranged backwoods way. And then there was
Hell or High Water. That's pretty hilarious.
No, not Hell or High Water. Oh, he was really funny in the Wonder Woman movies.
Oh, yes.
He played like a goofy dude in those as well.
Yeah. So there's a 2-movie genre here developing, and maybe we'll get more of it.
And I guess he was also in Wonder Woman 84, but the less said about that, the better. I don't know if it counts.
There's a 2.5 movie genre.
Yeah, not a good movie. So yeah, we're doing a lot of exposition between the escape, kind of dialogue between Holga and Edgin.
Yeah, there's a full flashback as he's telling his story to the parole board. There's a lot of flashback scenes. There's a flashback to a heist. There's like a full heist gone wrong in that opening segment. There's a ton going on.
Yeah, and then Forge catches us up on what's happened since they've been in jail. And it's a lot of table setting.
Yeah.
But it's delivered in such like a dynamic way. And it's so funny top to bottom that you just can't help but be charmed.
I was on board right away. And we talk about in other movies, John Carter was maybe the example of the worst, most clunky version of telling us a lot of history at the beginning of a fantasy sci-fi thing. And this is the opposite of that. This shows how you can pull pull it off and also delight the audience.
I think it's important to note that we're going to talk a lot about how funny this movie is, but that doesn't ever undermine the stakes.
No.
They do a good job to make sure you're still keenly aware that Edgin is in pain after losing his wife and his daughter. He's super motivated to get him back. None of this feels arbitrary, this mission they're on, this quest. You're always heavily invested, even if they're cracking jokes along the way.
The emotional stakes are high because they really do connect you with all the characters, and they take the time to do that with a bunch of characters in this party, and it all really works.
Yeah, and you had a good point about Holga.
Yeah, Holga is the character that took me the longest to connect to. She's pretty dry. She's the big, strong barbarian, and they did a gender flipping thing from the norms and expectations of who you might expect to play the big, bruising sidekick, which works great, and she's great in it. I was about to make a comparison that this movie this most reminds me of with big action stakes and emotional stakes is Guardians of the Galaxy, right? There's a bunch of, it's a team of fun characters. There's a wisecracking hero and all his fun sidekicks. And Holga is doing a Dave Bautista thing in this, I thought.
She's Draxing it up, yeah. She's strong and great fighter, but the humor in her dialogue comes from her, like, not understanding social cues.
Yeah.
But such a funny scene when they're about to be executed and she manages to pull out a brick from the floor and use it to block the axe that's going to take her head off and wipes out a room, like half a battalion by herself, while Chris Pine frantically tries to cut his ropes for 3 minutes.
Yeah.
It just keeps cutting back to him and no progress has been made on cutting the ropes. It's pretty great. And it's not so subversive anymore to have a badass female character and the wimpy male character, especially when Michelle Rodriguez is playing the female character. Like, we just come to expect that any character she plays is going to be very like capable and self-sufficient in a fighting scenario, but it's still hilarious.
She's great. And we'll come around to her at the end. They give her a lot of backstory too, which we'll get to in the next act. But she came around for me at the end.
Yeah, totally. Should I get into that middle section of the movie so we can show some of these cards we've been holding regarding certain cameos and such?
Yeah, let's hear what happens next.
All right. On their quest to retrieve Kira from Forge's castle and rob his vault, Edgin and Holga reunite with the down-on-his-luck sorcerer Simon. Simon suggests they seek help from a tiefling named Doric, played by Sophia Lillis, a druid with the power to shapeshift into animal form. Now that the team is assembled, their plan is to pull off their heist during the High Sun Games, a gladiatorial event which draws wealthy gamblers to Neverwinter from around the realm. During the games, Forge's vault will be packed with the treasure of all his rich visitors. Unfortunately, the vault is locked with a powerful spell which can only be dispelled using an artifact called the Helm of Disjunction. So the party visits a graveyard where they wake the corpses of ancient warriors to ask them the whereabouts of the helm. And the dead guys point them to an exceedingly forthright and noble paladin named Zenk Yandar, played by Regé-Jean Page. Zenk leads the party through the forbidding caverns of the Underdark, helps defeat an enormous dragon, and confers the Helm of Disjunction to Edgin on one condition. Edgin is forced to swear to give away all stolen riches to the people of Neverwinter.
Yeah, this movie is this incredibly complex stepwise plot. It's one set piece scene leading into the next, which is, I don't know, it's basic screenwriting that there's cause and effect and you can see every scene leads to the next. And it's real satisfying. And it also sets up a bunch of cool set pieces like the graveyard scene, which we'll get to.
Graveyard scene is up there for my favorite sequences in the movie. But let's talk a little bit about the new characters because we meet more than half the team in this section.
It's a heist movie putting the team together sequence, right?
Absolutely, which I'm a big fan of. They've got these great actors to round out the cast. Justice Smith seems like he's popping up in everything lately.
He's getting hot in Hollywood, I think.
He's really good in this type of role. He never makes, like, he's a loser, and you even called him a pathetic loser in your notes, but I don't think he ever comes across as pathetic. He comes across as, you still root for him, and I feel like somebody being pathetic means you're sick of them.
It's a tricky role because his magic is really weak, and then his game is weak because the whole plot connecting him to Doric, the Sophia Lillis character, is that he once tried to court her, and when he goes back to her, she doesn't even recognize him, doesn't know who he is. So he's really a sad sack, but you never get that feeling, like you never get the ick watching this character. He's always lovable.
And speaking of Sophia Lillis, I actually, in preparation for this episode, I went back and watched the first It movie from 2017. She's so good in that. I had a feeling she was going to do big things after seeing her performance in that. And then you see her popping up in stuff like Asteroid City and over here. So she's crushing it as well. And she's very good. She's also playing like a Drax type character a little bit because she's super powerful, but doesn't really know how to talk to people because she's not really a person. She's like a different race.
There's so much going on. There's so much setup in this movie, but you get to have fun with her right away because she transforms into this owl bear, which is a thing that I vaguely remembered from my familiarity with the Monster Manual back in the day. And she gets to just kick ass as an owl bear.
The owl bear gets another one of my favorite sequences, but that's in the third act.
Okay.
So I'll hold on to it for now. But then we finally meet Holga's former love that she was cast out of her tribe for loving. And then he broke up with her because she was so sad for getting kicked out of her tribe for loving him.
Yeah.
And it's none other than Marleman, played by Bradley Cooper.
Which I have to admit, he's a guy that you miss.
Because he doesn't have a big, stupid fucking fake nose.
He doesn't have makeup on. He's not a fantasy creature. He's just a little guy in this, and he's playing it so sweet and straight.
He's Hobbit-sized Bradley Cooper.
I guess because his face is small, you can miss that it's him. Because I did on rewatch. I'd seen it 8 months ago or whatever, and then I rewatched, and I'm like, oh, that Marleman guy's funny. And then I was like reading about the movie. I'm like, oh, that was Bradley Cooper.
I definitely missed it on my first watch, but I was drunk, in my defense. But yeah, it's easy to miss that it's him because everything's shot from Holga's POV, where he looks like a little speck on the floor.
He's not big in this,
but he's got a type because we meet his new girl.
His new wife is an even larger barbarian woman. So yeah, they both have types. It's a great little romance. It adds so much to Holga's backstory, which you could have done a movie without any backstory or just a little quick nod to it. But they develop this whole scene. She tries to go home, patch things over, and he's like, I want the best for you. And he plays it so straight. It's just really charming. It's a little Easter egg within the movie that's not necessary at all. It's character development for Holga. There's a tiny plot element where the walking stick that she found and gave him, she takes back, and it turns out to be the teleportation staff that they need for much of the plot of the third act. But like, that stick could have come from anywhere.
Good on Justice Smith for saying hither thither staff so many times without stumbling over his words. It's a very difficult thing to say.
And funny in a Dungeons & Dragons nerdy kind of way.
Also, to expand on your point about it's not really a necessary scene, I can't confirm because I've never actually seen it. Something tells me they didn't take this kind of care in building out the characters' backstories in Dungeons & Dragons 3, The Book of Vile Darkness. And that's what kind of separates this movie from those ones in the past that we've seen that. And not just the Dungeons & Dragons ones, but there's been a lot of like bad fantasy. Like I think of movies like Aragon. They're the ones who are like, people are just here for dragons and fire and spells. Like, we don't have to do any of that other stuff. But no, when you care about the characters involved and you understand them, it makes everything else so much better.
It's a tough genre. Fantasy movies, there's only a few standout examples. But I think people said that about like superhero movies for a while. They're like, it doesn't work. You can't do superheroes. And then someone was like, oh, what if comedy? What if characters? And then they like got a formula. And then these guys just were like, let's use that formula. And they execute it really well.
They might have leaned a little too hard on the comedy in the superhero genre. Thanos murders half the universe. And so it was like, well, that just happened. They don't necessarily need that at that moment.
It can get silly. This movie from the beginning, it sets itself up as a comedy first in a way that like, when you're talking about the fate of the contemporary world, which is the setting of the Avengers movies, the stakes feel different to you as the audience than they do in this. Like, the stakes are important to these characters because it's family and it's their lives and their self-image, but it's fine that everything that happens to get them there is somewhat silly.
Absolutely. Speaking of everything that gets them there being silly, let's talk about the graveyard scene. Truly incredible comedy writing here.
Yeah.
You really can resurrect a dead person and ask them 5 questions. Then there's some hilarious hijinks with them accidentally asking the first guy they dig up a bunch of questions.
That little comedy bit is gold. It's really good.
It's very like old school comedy, like Abbott and Costello type shit. But
it is.
It works. And then even better, they leave one guy after asking him 4 questions and forget that so he's just sitting there stuck now. Just hilarious stuff. I really enjoyed this scene.
Silly.
I don't want to call out any specific lines because people should just go watch it. It's so funny.
Yeah, you should. It's really fun. And that is just an extended comedy bit that leads them to meeting Zank, the Regé-Jean Page character.
Low-key, maybe the funniest character in the movie.
Really good. It's fun to bring in a big character like that in the middle who like twists the whole flavor, takes them somewhere new, and he carries it off really nicely.
Yeah, a guy who feels like he'd be the protagonist in like a more obvious Dungeons and Dragons movie, but he's such a weirdo. I called him like a fantasy Mormon in my notes because he was like, that's like the vibe I got from him. He's so puritanical.
He's so pure of thought and heart. And people say that, that's the essence of the D&D paladin class, but he's like such an unironic hero. He literally talks about how he does not enjoy irony. I didn't catch this till my second rewatch. When we meet him, he's rescuing some town people. There's a giant fish that has swallowed a creature's baby, and he does a literal save the cat. And I just can't, like, the screenwriters must have known that they were doing a Hollywood screenwriting trope by having the character literally save a cat when when we meet him to know that he's good. And he's just that kind of unironically good.
And he is thanked, the local townsperson or the father of the creature he saved, with a jingle jangle. And he responds, "And a jingle jangle to you, good sir," in the most heavily gravitas dipped tone he could muster. I don't think I laughed harder in this movie than when he is walking away from the group and Edgin starts being like, he walks in such a straight line. Oh, he's coming up on some rocks. What's he going to do? Is he going to go around them? And then he just steps over the rocks. He's nope, just stepping right over them.
that beat and just the way he comes down on the other side of the rock perfectly straight. It's so good. So funny.
I mean, we skipped a bunch of great comedy bits in here. Even like the big fight against the big dragon is hilarious because he's like a big fat dragon.
Yeah. There's so much silliness. But like in the middle of enormous action, that is the definition of an over-the-top Hollywood CGI action sequence, fighting a big dragon in an underground cavern. And yet they do all this good action and good comedy at the same time. It's very impressive.
The little brain creatures that they're like, oh, they're attracted to intelligence. And they walk right by the whole group without noticing them. It's such a funny movie. It reminded me of nothing more than The Nice Guys in terms of like, maybe it's not a pure comedy, but it's incredibly funny.
Yeah.
And it had that kind of tone of it's witty, not just funny. It's clever.
It's really good. I hope we're not overselling it. I want more people to watch it and discover it and get big laughs like we did.
I could maybe see somebody who really like loves Dungeons and Dragons not being more lukewarm on it because it's very silly, like we've said, and maybe that's not. But I think Dungeons and Dragons can be silly, you know?
Everyone I know who plays, at least as adults now who are going back and playing, there's a serious adventure to it, but the fun is hanging out with your friends and silly stuff happens. I think that in that sense, they did capture the essence of what D&D should be.
Yeah, and I read a little bit of a DM's guide preparing for this episode, and they said this is a good opportunity to have something really outrageous happen. Or like, it seems you want to keep, if you're a dungeon master, which is like the screenwriter of the game, then you want to keep people entertained and engaged.
Yeah.
Humor is a great way to do that.
Absolutely.
All right, that's all I've got for this section. Do you want to move on to the ending?
Yeah, let's bring this thing home. In preparation for the big heist, Simon tries to attune to the helm of disjunction, but he's thwarted, and it becomes a real crisis of confidence for him. Then the heroes attempt a plan B where they sneak into the vault using a teleportation portal, but that gets thwarted too with a stroke of bad luck. They split up in order to keep trying both approaches, and with some pluck, eventually both plans succeed. But when they do, they're surprised to find out that the vault is empty and it's a trap. Meanwhile, all the treasure has been moved underneath the Neverwinter arena and is rapidly being loaded onto Forge's ship so he can make off with it. The heroes are captured and thrown into the deadly shifting labyrinth of the High Sun Games, while Forge prepares his getaway and Sophia prepares to cast a spell that will turn the entire arena crowd into zombies, hastening the return of her evil Red Wizard master. With courage and teamwork, the heroes escape the maze, commandeer the treasure boat, and literally and figuratively win Kira back from the nefarious Forge. Then they use the teleportation spell to scatter all of Forge's gold onto the streets of Neverwinter, luring the innocent crowd of citizens out of range of the Sophia's spell, and this leads to a knockdown, drag-out street brawl between our heroes and Sophia herself. The good guys win, but in the battle, Holga is mortally wounded. So Edgin and Kira must make the painful decision to abandon the idea of resurrecting Kira's mom and use the Tablet of Reawakening to revive Holga instead. The Old Lord of Neverwinter is restored to health, Forge is sent to prison, and the city celebrates Edgin and friends as heroes of the realm.
Heroes of the realm.
It's a real happy ending at the end there.
Yes, and I would have been disappointed with anything less. This movie, it's a feel-good movie through and through. You should feel good when it's over as well.
It's not trying to be edgy at all. It's very traditional, but does a very strong all is lost moment that you expect going into the third act of a movie. Everyone's failing at executing the plans. They all blow up on Edgin, and Edgin does his big admission that he's actually weaker than you thought, and he's the biggest failure.
The champion of failure, I believe he calls himself.
Yeah, and it's a great mix of humor and real pathos by Chris Pine to pull that off.
Like I said, you never lose sight of the fact that he's always in emotional pain, and he's joking as a way of coping.
Yeah, totally.
Which is exactly how his character was in Hell or High Water, like you mentioned. Laugh a minute to hide up the fact that he was really hurting.
Oh, man. If you like your pain undiluted, go watch Hell or High Water.
Fucking love Ben Foster in that movie.
It's a good movie, but it shows you that Chris Pine is not content to be one type of actor in Hollywood, and he wants to do some serious shit sometimes. And he's great at that, too.
Sure is. The painting portal scheme, I liked it. I thought that was very clever. It was a unique twist because they have the staff where you can point one end somewhere and the other end somewhere else, and then it becomes a portal from what reminded me a lot of the video game Portal.
It does, yes. And the movie Ocean's 11 kind of like, this is a really complex heist scheme, they go, oh, we'll use the portal to sneak in. And you go, oh, that makes sense. And then when you see how complex it is, the way they actually execute it, it's really satisfying heist genre shit.
Like they're hammering floorboards through the portal in like a field somewhere, but like they're on the wagon hammering. It's just interesting and like really well thought out.
Flipping it around, putting them back. And then there's hilarious moments of tension where things are not quite working and they're scrambling and they're falling, being dragged behind wagons. It's really complicated, but excellently done. That's not so easy to make something that complex plot-wise come off.
Right. You're never lost about what's happening or why, which is super impressive. And then one of, again, the best bits in the movie is the singing bard.
Yeah.
When Edgin, who was formerly a harper, is playing his little mandolin and singing for the guards to distract them. But so what goes wrong exactly? Simon's foot gets stuck in like
You don't know that it's an illusion. It's not really Edgin. It's an illusion that Simon is casting. And you find out when his foot gets stuck and he's distracted. And so the illusion starts to come apart in just hilarious CGI way. And I thought it's like over the top goofy. It was like a trailer TV spot kind of moment. Because it's just, you can put it on screen and it's just funny to see Chris Pine's eyes bug out and him go, Doug. And I'm like, oh, I'm not going to laugh at that when that happens on rewatch because, it's kind of over the top. As a cheap humor, I'm not tickled by that. And then it happened again and I cracked up. I couldn't help myself. It's really funny.
But it's even better than in the trailer because you get time for the guards' reaction to what's going on, which is like, what devilry is this? Because it's got to be very freaky for them. We know what's happening. It's very funny. Man, this movie fucking rocks. I'm so excited to be covering it. What a good movie to come back with. Now you had some call outs in the maze section that I didn't notice any of this stuff.
Yeah. Throughout the movie, there's a lot of establishing shots of scenes and they'll just be like some creatures. And I'm like, oh, I should probably know what that creature was. And if I studied my monster manual more, I would know. There was a couple that I did know when they get to the maze. I remembered the displacer beast because that was always like a cool thing. It's this black panther with these tentacles that like project a version of itself. And I remember the gelatinous cube, which is actually a key plot point. That's the way they get out of the maze. And so I'm like, oh, I know my D&D. I had that little bit of a fanboy moment, couple things that I recognized. And then there was a big Easter egg that I didn't get. I only read about it afterwards.
Yes, I read about that.
So the rival party is dressed identically to the party in the 80s animated Dungeons & Dragons TV show, which I watched as a kid. I don't know if you ever got to see that. It was pretty early on. It would have had to have been rerunning, and it wasn't a long-running show.
I'm a lot younger than you, so no, I didn't get to see it when it was... No, I never did see it.
It was corny. It was way cornier. But if you go back to the cartoon, you see their outfits are exactly the same.
That is pretty cool. Good on Francis Daley and Goldstein for trying to pay homage to the original, not the original version of D&D because the game had been around already, but like stuff people like tug on the nostalgia strings a little bit. Sprinkle some member berries on your parfait.
We're shitting on the Jeremy Irons Dungeons & Dragons movie. There's a quote to that in this movie. There's a scene where Marlon Wayans steps on a carpet and it turns to quicksand and he gets trapped. And that's what happens to Edgin and Holga.
Oh yeah, that's true. I didn't know that happened in the 2000 movie, but I know what happens in this one.
They went to great lengths to throw a lot of nods.
People like references.
Now tell me this, did the end of the movie, we've likened it to Marvel movies in its formula of action comedy. The end of the movie also gave Marvel vibes because it gets big. It's
CGI battles.
Big CGI battle action sequences, kind of two action sequences stacked on each other. And
there's almost a sky beam, but it's actually like a red cloud.
It's a sky cloud. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very close to being a sky beam.
Did you start to feel that CGI fatigue in that final 20 minutes?
Yes, but they did manage to cram in some nice character moments. Like Edgin's not a warrior at any point, but he actually grabs Hulka's Darksteel axe and uses it to wedge the mouth of the stone dragon open, and like a very brave moment for him. And then I also thought it was, you said the owl bear kind of beating the shit out of Sophia reminded you of like Hulk beating up Loki, which it was definitely had that vibe. But I feel like she goes on for even like a little too long. That makes it even funnier. Like she's just slamming her into the ground repeatedly, and then she stops, looks around, picks her up, does it again a few times. I don't know. Like it felt like they knew they were going to lose the audience if they didn't sprinkle in some of that extra flavor they've been hitting us with for the rest of the movie. So it felt like a more engaging version of the Marvel finale.
It was a Marvel style finale, but done at the top of their game, where there was still lots of funny gags in it. They did the work to set up those characters, and the characters all had to come through in the end. The daughter plays a role in beating the evil wizard. There's a winning moment where she's back on her dad's side and she's part of the team. There's no shortage of heartwarming moments, including Holga's death. Like, it gets fucking serious twists in a funny way
Yeah.
at the very end when Holga literally dies from the blade of the Red Wizard and they have to decide to bring her back. But even then, while she's dying, she and Edgin sing their dumb song, which is like a perfectly asinine Renaissance style song with dopey lyrics. And they make them sing that as like the heartstring tugging moment, which is self-deflating, which I liked.
Yeah. They never abandon their scruples to emotionally manipulate, like everything works within the world they've created and it feels true to the characters and the movie.
Yeah.
But you also knew they were going to use the fucking tablet on Holga.
Yeah. And like I was saying, Holga, at first I was the coolest on her amongst all the characters. And they bring her back to life and she looks up to them and says, "Oh, don't tell me you wasted it on me. Why would you do that?" And I was like, oh, fuck, that really hit me. I was like, a little tear at that moment. And that brought that character around for me. So now I love her just as much as any of them.
Very true. I wasn't as cold towards Holga as you were, but that moment just made me love her even more. And I also wanted to give a shout out to Daisy Head for her performance as Sophia, because when she's dropped the shroud that she's working with Forge and not just using him, she becomes pretty fucking creepy and you take her seriously as a threat.
She's a good villain for this. And there's an uber villain over her, which they almost didn't need except plot wise. We didn't even say his name. I can't remember exactly how you pronounce it.
He's in 2 scenes and you can't even see him in them.
There was Lore. He's this even creepier, more skeletal red wizard. And that's maybe an example of where the movie was a little bit overstuffed, but she as the main villain, just really cool.
Yeah, we haven't mentioned it, but this is a long movie. It's 2 hours and 14 minutes. It doesn't feel that long, but it feels longer than 90 minutes for sure.
Yeah.
And I had a hard time thinking of what could be cut because even the scenes that don't necessarily do a lot plot-wise do a lot to make the movie enjoyable.
Yeah, totally. On my second rewatch, I was noticing even more things that connected little plot points that I didn't realize and that obviously weren't necessary to the enjoyment of the film, but it feels like there might have been even more in there that they elaborated on. So it's big in every way. It's a big Hollywood movie, and the only thing missing was big Hollywood box office.
I wish this movie had done better, but I am bolstered by this idea that they're going to make a show and another movie potentially. It's just great news.
That's super neat.
I'm really interested to see what John Francis Daley and Jonathan Goldstein do next.
Yeah.
Maybe you'd like to hear about it.
Yeah. Why don't we hear what happened to these people?
I mean, not a lot. This movie came out 10 months ago, but everyone's got something cooking. So Francis Daley and Goldstein have 2 movies. They have The Vacation Guide to the Solar System in development, which they're going to be co-directing. Then they have a TV show coming called Hysteria, which is currently in production. Follows, now I don't know if they're the creators of this or if they're just directing. It's still early. Struggling high school heavy metal band of outcasts who use the town's sudden interest in the occult to start a reputation as a satanic metal band. But then weird stuff starts happening and they get targeted, which sounds like a great premise for a show.
Totally.
Especially for someone like me. I absorbed all the Paradise Lost documentaries about the West Memphis 3 back in the day, which kind of was a similar scenario where it was just like the kid who drew pentagrams in his notebook. They were like, he's got to be the killer.
Oh, shit. Yeah, this sounds like a loaded premise.
And they've had an interesting career just as screenwriters. They co-wrote Horrible Bosses, which was a hit both critically and commercially. But then they co-wrote The Incredible Burt Wonderstone, so stay tuned for that as a future episode.
Okay.
Then they did their first directorial job was the 2015 Vacation, which I saw get some decent reviews, but mostly negative, I think.
Okay.
And then they wrote for Spider-Man Homecoming, but a lot of people wrote on that movie, They were considered to direct, but didn't get it. And then they were announced as co-directors of The Flash, which they smartly walked away from because that ended up being quite a cursed production.
They dodged a bullet there. Who knows if they saw the writing on the wall, but they got out just in time and slipped into this thing. And thank goodness for everybody.
We may be talking more about The Flash at some point. Maybe not this month, because I think you said it was like beating a dead horse.
Yeah, it does. I don't know. It seems so troubled in so many ways that it doesn't even seem fun to pile on, but we may be tempted to pile on at some point.
At some, maybe in 2 years, I'll be ready to talk about the Flash movie because it just cannibalized the movie news industry for months and months.
Yeah.
All right. Michael Gillio, I wanted to give a shout out to. He's only written 2 other movies, the 2001 road movie, Quick Stop, which got good reviews, and the 2023. So look at that gap. He went from 2001 to 2 movies in 2023 he was writing.
Bless him. He survived a long spell there and stayed in the industry.
I'll fill you in on how he managed that. But he wrote Dark Harvest, which I think was an Amazon Prime movie that came out around Halloween.
Oh.
And it was actually really good. So I would check that out. It's considered a fantasy horror.
Oh, okay.
It was an interesting movie. Not perfect, but I enjoyed it. But so he's been attached to several movies like those ones that you hear about in the trades that never actually happen, and then they just never happened. Justice League Dark, Carter Beats the Devil, Bitterroot. Like some of these were big name movies that were going to be blockbusters that just...
Oh, really?
So he probably got paid a decent amount to work on those. But he still got a screenwriting credit for this and a story by credit. So they must have kept some of his original vision.
No, that's great for him. This is a good calling card for everybody who gets to put their name on it.
And some of them need a good calling card. Let's talk about our boy, Chris Pine. He's in a bit of a slump.
When you look closely at his career, he's not the megastar that maybe I picture him as in my mind.
Right. Like he was never even named as one of the Chris's. It was downright disrespectful. Like they would always do Evans, Pratt, Hemsworth.
He was the
odd man out.
Kid brother of the Chris Club.
But I think he's my favorite of the Chris's. Yeah, I don't think he can open a movie on his own. So he's relegated to these weirdo roles, which he's very good at. But then headlining another $150 million movie that doesn't turn a profit is probably not going to be the best thing for his career.
But he doesn't care. He's directing his own shit now, right?
Yeah, let's talk about that. Pool Man, which he also co-wrote, got terrible reviews on the festival circuit. We don't know how it's going to be released yet. It might go straight to streaming. But I think the average score was like a 3.6 out of 10.
Jeez. I still need to see it, though. I need to see what he's up to. What's going on in his brain?
It's about a water theft, like Chinatown, I think is the premise.
I heard that. Yeah, it's like his modern take on Chinatown, except the private eye is a pool man.
Yeah, exactly. He's been in some direct-to-streaming schlock, The Contractor. It's like any movie with the and then a noun.
Yeah.
Like, that's not going to be good, except like The Town. But there's very few examples of good movies like that. I'm looking at you, The Beekeeper, starring Jason Statham.
Oh, we don't know yet.
We don't know. We don't know. Jason Statham just has jobs in movies. He's the mechanic.
Yeah.
He's the courier, I think, the transporter. Has he played a character named both the courier and the transporter? Is that possible?
He padded his resume by giving 2 different names to his job.
The delivery man. How many different ways are you going to say this? And then Pine, of course, also did Don't Worry, Darling, which made a little bit of money. Not a lot, but reviews were mixed at best. And we all know the big story of that movie was behind the scenes rather than in front of the camera.
It put him in the public eye. It was just as a way to do a lot of paparazzi photos of his fucking outfits, man.
His bohemian mask get-ups.
The dude loves to dress himself, or I don't know who's dressing him, but he can rock an outfit.
Flood pants and chancletas and these big straw hats. He's a maniac.
It's great. It's a great part of his lore as a Hollywood star.
And then he showed up at one of the panels with like shoulder length blonde hair pushed back and looked like somebody's auntie. And then maybe Harry Styles spit on him. That was the whole thing.
Yeah, that was the whole weird inscrutable thing. And for a movie that no one was going to pay enough attention to sort it out. So it just remained a weird piece of drama that you couldn't figure out whose side to take.
It was fine. Did you see it?
No, I think I turned it on and couldn't get into it. So I never watched it.
It's one of those movies where they thought they had like a real clever premise and didn't bother finishing it. They were like, isn't this smart? And then I'm like, yeah, but I don't want to spoil anything. So I won't say my questions. But
someday I'll go back.
Michelle Rodriguez, her only movie in production right now is Fast X Part 2.
Okay.
But she can probably retire comfortably whenever she feels like it because of the Fast and the Furious franchise.
Yeah, she made a career out of that one idea. Going fast and getting furious.
She also, we don't have a lot of justified crossover. We don't have any justified crossovers this week, but she did have a part as one of the most hated Lost characters of all time, Ana Lucia.
Oh, okay. I forgot that.
Not a fan favorite on Lost. She was under a lot of stress. And Regé-Jean Page was in The Gray Man and Bridgerton.
The highs and lows of streaming releases right there in a nutshell.
Yep. And he's starring as Butch Cassidy in a new series. That should be interesting.
That is very interesting to me. I had not heard of that. He's a fun actor. He has just a lot of charisma and presence. That's why I think he soared in Bridgerton, was just like you put him on screen and he's very handsome and he's charismatic. And Butch Cassidy certainly has a history with some charismatic screen presence actors. So let's see if he can live up to that.
And a jingle jangle to you, good sir. Justice Smith, I'm not even going to list all the movies he has in production. He's got 5 fucking movies in some form of production right now. This guy is everywhere. And I've enjoyed him. He was good in Detective Pikachu.
Oh, okay.
He was good in the Jurassic World movies, as good as anyone could be. And he was good in this. I'm a fan. I'm on board. I'll check out whatever he does.
He's neat. He's a great comic actor in this, but he's also doing some serious. We saw him in that. Did you watch that heist movie? Now I forgot what it was called, but he had a pretty much a serious role in a serious sort of long con. I think I recommended it to you. It was just a streaming release. I think that might have been the first time I noticed him.
He was in Sharper.
I
didn't see that. Oh yeah, with Julianne Moore.
Yeah.
Con artist takes on Manhattan billionaires. Why didn't I see this?
I know. I recommended it to you and you're like, oh, that sounds like my jam.
Yeah, he did. I remember that now. All right, well, I'll probably watch it tonight then.
If anyone's looking for a little extra Justice Smith, there's a dose of it online somewhere.
We could always use more Justice Smith. And finally, Sophia Lillis. Like I said, she got her breakout in the It movies, but she stayed pretty busy. She was in Asteroid City. She's in the upcoming The Burning season. I got a feeling she's going to be a movie star.
She's got a thing. She's got a quality. Good casting in this movie, right? Top to bottom.
Very, very well cast. You got, and then we're not even talking about Hugh Grant. Like, what a flex to just bring Hugh Grant in and like.
We skipped him, but he's another marvelous part of the comedy in this movie. Like, it's easy to not bother to mention him because he's so reliably good at this kind of role, but he's really good.
He's playing Hugh Grant, to be clear, but who doesn't want that?
No, he brings it home because he has to, he starts off a little bit shifty and then is this combination of droll and funny and evil that's really fun.
Absolutely. So that's everything I've got for Dungeons and Dragons. Do you have anything you wanted to add?
No. Oh, I did have one thing I wanted to add. Another
So quick to say no.
I say no. I'm humble that way, and then I do have things. I just wanted to say a thought that I jotted down as I was trying to take in this movie and figure out why it bombed. The name is too long. That's the only thing that I don't like about this movie.
It is long.
When we do this, we have to end up typing out the name here or there.
Yeah.
It abbreviates weird. It turns into D&D hat, which is funny right there.
I saw your synopsis said like D&D hat synopsis, and I was like, that's hilarious.
But it's too long to say. It's hard to remember. So that's my note to Goldstein and Daley. Next time, work on the title.
But you don't just want to call it Dungeons and Dragons. You don't just want to call it Honor Among Thieves. Like, they're in a spot. I get it.
No, you're right. They had to.
They had to do something with where you get both.
Yeah, where
they had to shake the stink of the old movies, and they had to make sure people knew it was a Dungeons and Dragons movie.
They were in a tough spot.
So continuing with our theme of 2023 bombs, next week we're doing one I'm very excited to talk about. I got high and tweeted about it from the Blast Zone account right after I saw it, and I think I called it astonishing, which I might have to walk back a little bit, but still really like it. The Creator by Gareth Edwards, starring John David Washington. Big budget sci-fi, maybe not as big budget as you think. That was not based on any IP. Seemed like it could have been like an Alex Garland type of movie. Really enjoyed it, and unfortunately it bombed. So we're going to talk about it.
I'm excited to talk about it. I took your recommendation and I watched it back then, and I was equally impressed. The movie makes a big impression on you right away. I have some qualms that we'll talk about, but
fuck, Ian's got qualms.
I always got some qualms in my back pocket.
God damn it. Oh man, we forgot what we were doing because we haven't done this in so long.
Yeah. What do we do? Plug things? Ask people to engage with us?
Yeah, why don't you engage with us? You can follow us on Twitter. I'll probably start posting on there more regularly now that the show's back, but at BlastZonePod. You can email us, blastzonepod@gmail.com if you have any suggestions, feedback. Just tell us what you got up to when we were gone.
Magic spells.
And we will see you next time in the Blast Zone.
See you next time in the Blast Zone.
The Blast Zone.